Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. The Son. Timid and weeping, the boy had attended his mother's funeral. Gloomy and timid, he had listened to Siddhartha, who had greeted him as his son and welcomed him in Vasudeva's hut. Pale, he sat for days on the dead woman's hill, refused to eat, closed up his eyes, closed up his heart, strained and strove against destiny. Siddhartha indulged him and let him be. He honored his grief. Siddhartha understood that his son did not know him, that he could not love him as a father. Slowly, he saw and understood, too, that the 11-year-old was a pampered boy, a mama's boy, brought up in the habits of wealth, accustomed to finer food, to a soft bed, accustomed to ordering servants around. Siddhartha understood that the grieving, pampered boy could not suddenly, unwillingly be content in a strange place and in poverty. He did not force him. He did some chores for him. He always picked out the best morsel for him. He hoped he would win him over slowly, through friendly patience. He had felt rich and happy when the boy had come to him, but time flowed on, and since the boy remained foreign and surly, displaying a proud and defiant heart, refusing to work, showing the old men no respect, robbing Vasudeva's fruit trees, Siddhartha began to realize that his son had not brought peace and happiness to him, but sorrow and suffering, of love more than joy and happiness without the boy. When young Siddhartha had arrived in the hut, the old men had divided their labor. Vasudeva had taken over as sole ferryman, and Siddhartha the labor in hut and field in order to be with his son. For a long time, long months, Siddhartha waited for his son to understand, to accept his love, perhaps to love him back. For long months, Vasudeva waited, watched and waited, and held his tongue. One evening, when the young Siddhartha had once again tortured his father with moods and defiance, and had broken both the rice bowls, Vasudeva took his friend aside and spoke to him. "Forgive me," he said, "but I am talking to you with a friendly heart. I see that you are in torment. I see that you are in anguish. Your son, dear friend, is causing you worry, and he is causing me worry too. The young bird is used to a different life, to a different nest. He did not flee the wealth and the town as you did, out of disgust and surfeit. He had to leave them against his will. I have asked the river, my friend. I have asked it many times, but the river laughs. It laughs at me. It laughs at me and you. And it shakes with laughter at our folly. Water wants water. Youth wants youth. Your son is not in a place where he can thrive. You too ask the river. You too listen to its answer." Worried, Siddhartha gazed into the friendly face, its many wrinkles always wreathed in merriment. "Can I part with him?" he asked softly, embarrassed. "Give me more time, dear friend. Look, I am fighting for him. I am wooing his heart. I want to capture it with love and friendly patience. Let the river speak to him too someday. He too is called." Vasudeva's smile blossomed more warmly. "Oh yes, he too is called. He too is of eternal life. Do we know then, you and I, to what he is called? To what path? To what deeds? To what sufferings? His sufferings will not be small. His heart is too hard and proud. Such hearts must suffer much, wander much, do much injustice, saddle themselves with many sins. Tell me, dear friend, are you not raising your son? Do you not force him? Do you not beat him? Do you not punish him?" "No, Vasudeva, I do none of that." "I knew it. You never force him, never beat him, never order him, because you know that soft is stronger than hard, water stronger than rock, love stronger than violence. Very good. I praise you. But is it not a mistake on your part to believe that You never force him, never punish him? Do you not bind him in bonds with your love? Do you not shame him daily and make things even harder for him with your kindness and patience? Do you not force him, the arrogant and pampered boy, to live in a hut with 2 old banana eaters, for whom even rice is a delicacy, whose thoughts cannot be his, whose hearts are old and silent and take a different course from his? Is he not forced by all this? Not punished? Abashed, Siddhartha gazed at the ground. Softly he asked, "What do you think I should do?" Vasudeva said, "Take him to town. Take him to his mother's house. Some servants must still be there. Put him in their care, and if none are left, then take him to a teacher, not for the teaching, but so that he can be with other boys and with girls and in the world that is his. Have you never thought of that?" "You see into my heart," said Siddhartha sadly. "I have often thought of that, but look, he has no gentle heart, so how can I put him in that world? Will he not become haughty? Will he not surrender to pleasure and power? Will he not repeat all his father's mistakes? Will he not perhaps lose himself entirely in samsara?" The ferryman's smile beamed bright. He gently touched Siddhartha's arm and said, "Ask the river, my friend. Hear it laugh at that. Do you really believe you committed your follies to spare your son? And can you shield your son against samsara? How? Through teaching? Through praying? Through admonishing? My friend, have you fully forgotten that tale, that instructive tale you once told me here about Siddhartha, the Brahmin's son? Who saved Siddhartha the Samana from samsara, from sin, from greed, from folly? Could his father's piety, his teacher's admonitions, his own knowing, his own seeking save him? What father, what teacher could shield him from living his own life, soiling himself with life, burdening himself with guilt, drinking the bitter drink himself, finding his path himself? Do you really believe, dear friend, that anyone at all is spared this path? Perhaps your little son, because you love him, because you would like to spare him pain and sorrow and dissolution? But even if you died for him 10 times over, you could not take away even the tiniest bit of his destiny." Never had Vasudeva spoken so many words. Siddhartha thanked him in a friendly fashion, went, worried, into the hut, but found no sleep for a long time. Vasudeva had told him nothing that he himself had not already thought and known, but it was a knowledge he could not act on. Stronger than his knowledge was his love for the boy. Stronger his tenderness, his fear of losing him. Had he ever lost his heart so greatly? Had he ever loved anyone like this, with a love so blind, so painful, so futile, and yet so happy? Siddhartha could not take his friend's advice. He could not give up his son. He let the boy order him around. He let him despise him. Silently he waited. Daily he began the mute struggle of friendliness, the soundless war of patience. Vasudeva also silently waited, friendly, knowing, forbearing. In patience they were both masters. Once, when the boy's face reminded him very much of Kamala, Siddhartha recalled something she had said to him long ago, in the days of youth. "You cannot love," she had said to him, and he had agreed with her, and had likened himself to a star, and the child people to falling leaves, and yet he had sensed a rebuke in her words. Indeed, he had never been able to lose himself completely in anyone else, give himself completely to another person, forget himself, commit follies of love for someone else. He had never been able to do these things, and this had struck him as the great gap between him and the child people. But now that his son was here, now he, Siddhartha too, had become a child person, suffering for someone else, loving someone else, lost in a love, a fool for love. Now he too, at this late time, felt the strongest and strangest passion, suffered from it, suffered woefully, and yet he was blissful, was somewhat renewed, was somewhat richer. He did sense that this love, this blind love for his son, was a passion, something very human, that it was samsara, a troubled wellspring, a dark water, yet he also felt that it was not worthless, that it was necessary, came from his own being. This pleasure, too, had to be atoned for. These pains, too, had to be savored. These follies, too, had to be committed. Meanwhile, the son let him commit his follies, let him woo, humiliated him daily with his moods. This father had nothing for the son to delight in, and nothing to fear. He was a good man, this father, a kind, a gentleman, perhaps a very pious man, perhaps a saint, but none of these were qualities that could win the boy over. He was bored with this father, who kept him captive in his wretched hut. He was bored with him and with his way of responding to every rotten act with smiles, to every insult with friendliness, to every nastiness with kindness. That was the most hateful cunning of that old conniver. The boy would much rather have been threatened by him, mistreated by him. A day came when young Siddhartha blurted out his feelings and openly turned against his father. His father had given him a chore, had told him to gather brushwood, but the boy did not leave the hut. He stood there, defiant and furious, stamped his foot, clenched his fists, and in violent eruption yelled hate and scorn in his father's face. "Get brushwood yourself," he shouted, foaming. "I'm not your slave. I know you won't hit me. You don't dare. I know you constantly want to punish me and belittle me with your piety and your indulgence. You want me to be just like you, just as pious, just as gentle, just as wise. But listen, to spite you, I'd rather be a highwayman and murderer and go to hell than become like you. I hate you. You're not my father, even if you were my mother's lover 10 times over." Grief and anger boiled over in him, foamed toward the father in 100 wild and evil words. Then the boy ran away and did not come back till late in the evening. But the next morning he had disappeared. And also gone was a small woven basket of 2-colored baste, where the ferrymen kept the copper and silver coins they received as fares. And also gone was the boat. Siddhartha saw it lying on the opposite bank. The boy had run away. "I have to follow him," said Siddhartha, who had been trembling since yesterday because of the boy's abusive words. "A child cannot go through the forest alone. He will die. We have to build a raft, Vasudeva, to cross the water." "We will build a raft," said Vasudeva, "to get back our boat, which the boy has taken away. But as for him, dear friend, you should let him go. He's no longer a child. He can take care of himself. He is seeking the path to town, and he is right. Do not forget that. He is doing what you yourself have failed to do. He is taking care of himself. He is going his own way." "Ah, Siddhartha, I see you suffering, but you are suffering pains that others would laugh at, that you will soon laugh at yourself." Siddhartha did not reply. He was already clutching the axe, and he began to make a raft of bamboo, and Vasudeva helped him to bind the canes with grass ropes. Then they rafted across, or carried far, pulled the raft upstream on the opposite bank. "Why have you brought the axe along?" asked Siddhartha. Vasudeva said, "An oar of our boat may have been lost." But Siddhartha knew what his friend was thinking. He was thinking that the boy had thrown away or shattered the oar to avenge himself, and to prevent them from following him. And indeed, no oar was left in the boat. Vasudeva pointed to the bottom of the boat and smiled at his friend, as if to say, "Don't you see what your son is trying to tell you? Don't you see that he doesn't want to be followed?" But he did not put those thoughts into words. He set about making a new oar. Siddhartha, however, said goodbye and went to seek the runaway. Vasudeva did not hinder him. After Siddhartha had been walking through the forest for a long time, it occurred to him that his seeking was useless. Either he thought the boy was far ahead of him and had already reached the town, or, if he was still on the way, he would hide from this man who was following him. Thinking further, he also found that he was no longer worried about his son. Deep down, he knew that his son neither had perished nor was menaced by any danger in the forest. Nevertheless, he ran without resting. No longer to rescue his son. He desired only to see him, perhaps, and he ran until he reached the town. But when he came to the broad road near the town, he halted at the entrance to the beautiful pleasure garden that had once belonged to Kamala, where he had first seen her in her sedan. Again, the bygone arose in his soul. Again, he saw himself standing there, a bearded, naked Samana, his hair full of dust. For a long time Siddhartha stood there, peering through the open gate into the garden. He saw monks and yellow cows wandering under the beautiful trees. For a long time he stood, reflecting, seeing images, listening to the tale of his life. For a long time he stood, gazing at the monks, saw young Siddhartha instead of them, saw young Kamala walking under the tall trees. He clearly saw himself being regaled by Kamala, receiving her first kiss, proudly and scornfully looking back at his Brahmin years, proudly and yearningly beginning his worldly life. He saw Kamaswami, saw the servants, the banquets, the dicers, the musicians, saw Kamala's songbird in its cage, relived all these things, breathed samsara, was again old and tired, again felt the disgust, again felt the wish to snuff himself out, again was healed by the holy Om. After standing at the garden gate, Siddhartha realized how foolish was the desire that had driven him to this place. He realized that he could not help his son, that he must not cling to him. He felt deep love in his heart for the runaway. It was like a wound, and he also felt that the wound was not for wallowing, that it must become a blossom and shine. It saddened him that the wound was not yet blossoming, not yet radiant. The goal of his wish, which had drawn him here after the runaway son, was now replaced by emptiness. Sad, he settled down, felt something dying in his heart, felt emptiness, saw no more joy, no goal. He sat there, waiting, lost in thought. That was what he had heard on the river, that one thing, to wait, to listen, to have patience. And he sat and listened in the dust of the street, listened to his sad and weary heart, waited for its voice. For several hours he squatted there, listening, saw no more images, sank into emptiness, let himself sink without seeing away. And whenever he felt the burning wound, he soundlessly uttered the Om, filled himself with Om. The monks in the garden saw him, and since he squatted for many hours with the dust collecting on his gray hair, one monk came over and placed 2 pisang fruits before him. The old man did not see him. From this daze a hand awoke him, touching his shoulder. Instantly he recognized this touch, tender and timid, and he came to. He stood up and greeted Vasudeva, who had followed him. And peering into Vasudeva's friendly face, into the small wrinkles filled with smiling, into the cheerful eyes, he also smiled. He now saw the pisang fruits lying in front of him. He picked them up, gave one to the ferryman, and ate the other himself. Then he silently went back to the forest with Vasudeva, returned home to the ferry, neither spoke about what had happened that day, neither uttered the boy's name, neither spoke about his escape, neither spoke about the wound. In the hut, Siddhartha lay down on his pallet, and when Vasudeva came over after a while to offer him a bowl of coconut milk, he found him asleep.